What if a royal baby was born so disturbing that the palace sealed the room, silenced the witnesses, and rewrote the birth records forever? What if this child had two faces, one that cried like a newborn, and another that never slept? Before we begin, if you enjoy dark historical mysteries, forbidden royal secrets, and true stories history tried to erase, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because stories like this were never meant to be told, but they deserve to be remembered. The bells rang only once that night, not in celebration, not in joy, but in warning. Deep inside the royal capital, that single sound crawled through empty streets and stone corridors, making servants pause mid-step and guards grip their spears a little tighter. Something had gone wrong inside the palace. Something so wrong that even the bells refused to ring twice. Queen Adelaide had been in labor for nearly 2 days. The palace had been sealed, curtains drawn, prayers whispered in every chapel. This child mattered more than any before. The kingdom's future rested on this birth. Years of war, failed heirs, and whispered curses had left the royal bloodline fragile. If this child lived, the crown survived. If not, chaos would follow. Inside the birthing chamber, the air was thick with incense and fear. Physicians moved carefully, their faces tight with exhaustion. Midwives murmured reassurances they no longer believed. The king waited outside the door, pacing so much that the stone floor beneath his boots had begun to show wear. Every cry from inside made him flinch. Every silence felt worse. Then the scream came. It was not the cry of a newborn. It was not the pain of childbirth. It was sharp, unnatural, and filled with terror. The door flew open, and one of the midwives stumbled out, her hands shaking violently, her eyes wide as if she had seen death itself. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Behind her, another woman dropped to her knees and began praying loudly, repeating the same verse again and again. One of the physicians crossed himself so fast, his fingers blurred. The king pushed past them and entered the chamber. The moment he saw the child, his breath left his body. The baby lay wrapped in royal linen, moving, breathing, alive. But it was wrong. Horribly wrong. The child had two faces. One face looked like any newborn prince, soft skin, closed eyes, mouth opening and closing in a weak cry. The other face was fused to the back of the head, smaller, misshapen, its eyes half open, and unblinking. What? The first face cried like a baby. The second remained silent, watching. Queen Adelaide lay frozen on the bed, tears sliding into her hair, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. She refused to turn her head. She refused to look at what she had brought into the world. Silence swallowed the room. Finally, the chief physician, Dr. Henry Valois, spoke, his voice barely audible. He said that no one outside this room must ever know. Not the court, not the church, not the people. The midwives nodded immediately, fear sealing their lips. They knew what happened to those who carried forbidden truths. The king stepped closer, his face pale. He stared at the child for a long time before whispering words that chilled everyone present. He said this could not be his son, but it was. Behind the baby's ear was the royal birthmark, a crescent-shaped scar passed down through generations. There was no denying the bloodline. The child was royal. And that truth was more terrifying than any curse. By sunrise, the palace had changed. The birth was officially recorded as a stillbirth. The bells rang again, this time in mourning. Black banners were raised. Messengers announced to the city that the queen had lost her child. The people cried for a prince who, according to history, never lived. But beneath the palace, the child was alive. He was carried down into a forgotten chamber, under the east wing, a place once used to store broken relics and abandoned crowns. Thick stone walls sealed the room. Guards were posted day and night. Only a handful of people were allowed inside the king. Dr. Valois, a single nurse sworn to silence, and on rare occasions, the queen. They named the child Lucien. From the very beginning, Lucien was different. The front face behaved like any infant. It cried when hungry, slept when rocked, clutched fingers placed in its tiny hand. But the second face never slept. Its eyes followed movement. When someone entered the room, it noticed before the first face reacted. The nurse, a woman who had served the royal family for decades, began reporting strange things. She said the second face reacted to voices, especially when the king spoke. She said it frowned during prayers. Once, she claimed it smiled before anyone else in the room moved. No one laughed at her. Fear had already replaced disbelief. Dr. Valois kept secret journals, written in coded language and hidden among medical texts. He described the condition as a rare anomaly, but admitted in private that it defied everything he knew. The second face showed signs of awareness, not reflex. Awareness. The queen avoided the chamber. After the birth, She barely spoke. She stopped attending court. She avoided mirrors and windows. At night, she woke screaming, claiming she heard whispering coming from inside the walls, a child's voice calling her name. The king, however, visited often. He would sit beside the crib in silence, staring longer at the second face than the first. Once, Dr. Valois overheard him asking, softly, which one of them was meant to rule. As weeks turned into months, rumors began spreading through the palace. Servants whispered about a cursed heir. Priests argued behind closed doors. An astrologer claimed the stars on the night of Lucien's birth had split, a sign of divided fate and bloodshed. When Lucien was 6 months old, something happened that could no longer be explained away. The nurse entered the chamber one evening and found the child sitting upright. The front face laughed softly, reaching for her. The second face stared directly into her eyes. And then, it spoke. It did not cry. It did not babble. It said one word. Don't. The nurse collapsed on the stone floor. By the time guards arrived, she was unconscious. When she woke days later, her hair had turned white. She never spoke again. Dr. Valois tried to dismiss the incident publicly, blaming exhaustion and fear. But in his private journal, his handwriting shook as he wrote that speech. At that age was impossible. He admitted that something about the child was deeply wrong. Security tightened. The chamber was reinforced. Mirrors were removed. Guards were rotated frequently. Priests were forbidden from entering. The palace tried to bury the truth deeper, but Lucien continued to grow. By his first birthday, the second face reacted differently. Two different people. It narrowed its eyes when the king entered. It turned away when the queen's name was spoken. When priests attempted blessings from the doorway, candles flickered violently, as if disturbed by unseen breath. Above ground, the kingdom mourned a child it believed dead. Below, the royal heir was learning to speak. Dr. Valois began suspecting that the second face carried memories that did not belong to a child. Once, alone in the chamber, he whispered if Lucien knew who he was. The second face responded quietly, calmly, with words that froze him in place. I was before. That night, the queen tried to take her own life. She was stopped just in time. Through tears, she whispered that the child looked at her as if it knew what she had done. No one understood her words, but fear spread like poison. Because the royal baby born with two faces was no longer just a secret, it was becoming a threat, and the palace was running out of time to decide what to do with a child who might remember a life before his own. The first official order came quietly, written in the king's own hand and sealed with black wax. No outsiders were to speak of the child. No priests were to enter the lower chambers. And no records, journals, or birth notes were to exist beyond what the crown approved. Lucien was to be erased while still breathing. But secrets behave like living things. The more tightly they are buried, the more violently they struggle to surface. Dr. Valois noticed the changes first. Lucien's body grew at a normal pace, but the second face matured faster. Its eyes sharpened with understanding. Its expressions became deliberate. It reacted not just to sound, but to meaning. When guards argued outside the chamber, the second face smirked. When the king raised his voice, it stiffened. When the queen finally entered the room after months of absence, the second face stared at her so intensely that she nearly fainted. She could not stay long. The moment Lucien's eyes met hers, she felt something ancient and accusing press against her chest. She left the chamber shaking, whispering prayers she had not spoken since childhood. Whispers began to spread through the clergy, despite the ban. A cardinal demanded answers, claiming rumors of a double-faced demon had reached the cathedral. The king dismissed him publicly, but privately, fear gnawed at his resolve. He ordered Dr. Valois to determine whether the child was truly human or something else, wearing royal flesh. Valois worked alone now. The nurse had been removed. Guards refused to look directly at the child. In the dim light of oil lamps, Valois tested reflexes, speech, and awareness. The front face behaved like a child. The second face behaved like a witness. It listened. One night, Valois made a mistake that would haunt him forever. Exhausted and shaken, he asked the second face why it never slept. The child's lips curled slowly, carefully, as if choosing each word. Because I already rested once. Valois felt the room tilt. He asked what that meant. The second face turned its eyes toward the ceiling, toward the palace above, toward the throne itself. I died there, it said. The physician stumbled backward. His mind rejected the words, but his body understood the danger. He tried to leave the chamber, but the front face began to cry loudly, sharply, as if in pain. When Valois turned back, the second face was smiling. After that night, the doctor began to believe the unthinkable. The second face was not just aware. It remembered. And whatever it remembered, was tied to the royal family. Meanwhile, the queen's health deteriorated. She refused food. She refused company. At night, she screamed that the walls were watching her. Once, she clawed at her own arms, sobbing that the eyes behind her son's head were not his own. The king tried to comfort her, but guilt sat between them like a third presence, because the queen was hiding something. Years before Lucien's birth, she had sought the help of a forbidden mystic after suffering repeated The woman had promised a living heir, but warned that life taken would demand life returned. The queen had never spoken of what she agreed to in that candlelit room. Now she believed the debt had come due. As Lucien approached his second year, the second face began speaking in full sentences. Not to everyone, only to those it chose. It mocked guards by repeating their secrets. It whispered to the king about decisions he had made in private council. Once, when the queen passed the sealed corridor above the chamber, she heard her own voice echoed back to her, repeating words she had spoken only in prayer. The church could no longer be kept at bay. A secret tribunal was convened. Some called the child a demon. Others called him a punishment. One bishop suggested the second face was a soul trapped between worlds, bound to the living by royal sin. The final verdict was clear. The child could not be allowed to live. The king signed the order with trembling hands. Lucien was to be quietly released from suffering. No records, no witnesses beyond Valois, and 2 trusted guards. The chamber would be sealed forever afterward. That night, Valois entered the room, knowing he was about to commit murder. The front face slept peacefully. The second face was awake, watching him approach. Before Valois could speak, the second face spoke first. "You won't do it?" it said calmly. Valois froze. He asked how it knew. The child tilted its head slightly. "Because you're afraid," it said. "And because if I die, you follow." The physician felt his knees weaken. He asked what it wanted. The second face's smile faded. "I want to be seen," it said. "And I want him to remember what he did." Moments later, the king arrived, unable to stay away despite the order being his own. He stared at the child for a long time. The second face met his gaze without fear. "You pushed me," it said. The king staggered back, breath hitching. No one else in the room understood the words, but he did. Years earlier, a rival prince had fallen from a palace balcony during a struggle for succession. The death had been ruled an accident. The crown had passed to the current king days later. The second face smiled again, but that was when the king realized the truth. The child was not cursed by chance. He was haunted by memory. By the 3rd year of Lucien's life, the palace no longer felt like a place of power. It felt like a cage built around a secret that was slowly learning how to rattle its bars. Guards avoided the east wing entirely. Servants refused night shifts near the sealed corridors. Even the king, once proud and commanding, now walked with the weight of something unseen pressing down on his shoulders. The order to kill the child was never carried out. The king could not bring himself to give the final word. After the second face spoke of the balcony, of the push, of the moment the rival prince's hand slipped from the stone railing, something inside him broke. He began to understand that this was not merely a monster born of flesh, but a reckoning given breath. Dr. Valois noticed that the second face grew stronger as the king weakened. Its voice deepened slightly, its words chosen with unsettling care. It spoke not like a child discovering the world, but like someone remembering it. Sometimes it would fall silent for hours, staring into nothing, as if watching scenes only it could see. Other times, it spoke with cruel precision, describing events from years past in detail. No living witness should have known. The queen finally confessed her secret to Valois during a sleepless night. She admitted that, before Lucien's birth, she had begged the mystic for an heir, and had been told that a soul lost unjustly could be bound to a new life. She swore she had not understood the price at the time. She had believed it to be superstition, desperation, clouding her judgment. Now she knew better. The child was not just her son. He was the echo of a crime that had never been punished. As Lucien learned to walk, the second face began to laugh. Not the innocent laughter of a child, but something quieter and sharper, filled with recognition. When the king entered the chamber, the second face would sometimes whisper his name before anyone announced him. It would speak of the throne, of the weight of the crown, of how easily it had been taken. Word reached the palace that a group of priests planned to expose everything. The church feared that if the truth came out, faith in the monarchy would collapse. The king ordered arrests. Several men disappeared overnight. Their absence only fed the rumors. Outside the palace walls, people began to whisper that the royal family was cursed, that God had turned his face away. One evening, during a violent storm, the palace was plunged into darkness. Thunder shook the stone foundations. In the lower chamber, Lucien screamed in pain for the first time. Dr. Valois rushed in to find the child convulsing, both faces contorted. When the second face finally spoke, Its voice was filled with rage. "You cannot keep me buried forever," it said. "The truth rots when it is sealed." That same night, the queen vanished. Her chambers were found empty, her bed untouched. Some said she fled. Others said she threw herself into the river. The king knew the truth without proof. She had gone. To silence herself before the child could speak her guilt aloud. With the queen gone, the king unraveled quickly. He stopped attending council meetings. He avoided mirrors. He refused to sit on the throne. And every night, he heard footsteps behind him, always stopping just short of where he stood. Dr. Valois began to fear that Lucien was no longer just observing. He was waiting. On the child's 4th birthday, the second face made its demand. "It's time," it said calmly. "You will take me upstairs." The king refused. He shouted, ordered guards, threatened execution. The second face only smiled. "You already know what happens if you don't," it said. That night, the palace doors opened without command. Guards found themselves unable to move, their bodies frozen by terror or guilt or something they could not explain. Lucien was carried upward through corridors he had never seen, past portraits of kings whose eyes seemed to follow him. When the child entered the throne room, the second face looked directly at the empty chair and whispered, "Mine." The king collapsed. By morning, the palace was silent. The king was dead, found alone at the foot of the throne, his face locked in terror. No wounds, no poison, no explanation. The official record called it sudden illness. Lucien disappeared. The chamber beneath the east wing was sealed forever. Dr. Valois burned his journals, all but one page, which he hid inside the binding of an old medical text. The church declared the royal line ended by divine will. A new dynasty rose within the year. But those who worked in the palace swore that sometimes, late at night, they heard a child's footsteps echoing through the halls. And sometimes, when lightning struck just right, portraits of the old king. They appeared to be watching something behind them. Something with 2 faces. Years passed, and the kingdom learned how to forget. New banners replaced the old. A new royal family sat upon the throne, carefully avoiding mention of the dynasty that came before. Official records listed the former king's death as sudden failure of the heart. The queen's disappearance was described as grief-driven madness, and the child, named Lucien, was never mentioned again. But forgetting does not mean erasing. Dr. Henry Valois lived just long enough to understand that some truths survive even when every effort is made to destroy them. He left the capital quietly, carrying nothing but a single book bound in cracked leather. Inside it, hidden between brittle pages, was the last surviving record of the child with 2 faces. Valois knew that if the knowledge ever resurfaced, it would be enough to shatter the crown all over again. In his final years, Valois began to notice something unsettling. Children born near the old palace grounds sometimes stared at people with unnatural focus. A few spoke of dreams, where they walked stone halls they had never seen. One child, no older than 5, told his mother that the throne room still belonged to someone else. The church dismissed these as fantasies. Valois did not. The sealed chamber beneath the east wing remained untouched, but not forgotten. Guards stationed nearby refused to sleep near it. Some claimed they heard breathing behind the walls. Others said 2 voices whispered at once, arguing softly in the dark. When renovations were proposed decades later, workers refused to break the stone. One man swore that when his hammer struck the wall, it struck back. Legends began to grow in the shadows of official history. People spoke of a royal ghost, a child who carried the sins of kings. Some claimed he walked the palace at night, unseen, watching each new ruler with quiet judgment. Others said he had escaped entirely, that he lived on in another body, waiting for the right moment to return. The truth came dangerously close to the surface. Nearly a century later, when a fire swept through the old archives, among the ashes, a historian found fragments of a journal written in coded medical language. Most of it was destroyed, but one line survived, burned but still readable. He remembers how he died. The fragment was quickly confiscated. The historian was paid generously and warned never to speak of it. He obeyed, but the line stayed with him until his death. Today, the palace still stands. Tour guides speak of architecture, of coronations, of wars, won and lost. They never mention the sealed wing. They never explain why no mirrors are placed along that corridor. And they never answer questions about the faint, childlike laughter, sometimes reported after midnight. Because somewhere between myth and memory, the royal baby born with 2 faces did exactly what he promised. He was seen, not by the people, not by history books, but by the throne itself. And some truths do not need witnesses to remain alive.